Yeast. Whether you know what it is or not, you see it being used almost every day. But before we get into the details, let's cover the origins of yeast. Evidence of yeast can be traced back almost 5,000 years ago, back to the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians used yeast to make bread, but disregarded its ability to fermentate alcohol. Thinking that yeast fermentation process was a miracle, the ancient Egyptians were unable to use yeast to fermentate alcohol. The fermentation process wasn't fully understood until the year 1857, when Louis Pasteur came into the scene. But let's not get too caught up in the history of yeast. Let's get to the good stuff. Yeast is used in the making of bread and the fermentation of alcohol. In both uses of yeast, a chemical reaction occurs. If you don't know what a chemical reaction is, I'll give you a definition that will be easy to understand. A chemical reaction is when two or more substances react with one another to create a new substance. Please remember, this change can be undone under the right circumstances. So, you get it now? Good. Let's continue. So now that we know what a chemical reaction is, how do we know that the uses of yeast involve chemical reactions? Well, let's take a look at yeast and bread. The chemical equation for yeast fermentation is yeast plus C6H12O6 yields to 2CO2 plus 2 alcohol molecules. The reactants of this chemical equation are yeast and C6H12O6, or glucose, and the products of this chemical equation are 2CO2 and 2 alcohol molecules. This applies to both bread and alcohol. So, when yeast is added to the bread batter, which consists of water, sugar, salt, and flour, it is attracted to the sugar and water. The water in the bread batter activates yeast, causing it to take in the sugars of the bread batter. When the bread is put into the oven, the heat causes the yeast to release the carbon dioxide it gained by taking in the sugars, or you could say that the bonds between the carbon dioxide and yeast were broken. The alcohol, or ethanol, evaporates. This carbon dioxide causes the bread to rise and gives the bread its taste and texture. The carbon dioxide leaves the bread and is released into the atmosphere. Now, notice that a gas was released when the yeast was heated up. The production of a gas, in this case carbon dioxide, is evidence of a chemical reaction. Also, the change in color from the transition of bread batter to baked bread is evidence of a chemical reaction. Finally, the odor produced from baking the bread is evidence of a chemical reaction. Now that we've covered bread, let's move on to yeast and alcohol. When making an alcoholic beverage, a vintner, or someone who makes wine, starts with the juice of a fruit. Once the vintner gathers the amount of juice that they need, the vintner mixes yeast into the liquid. The yeast is once again activated by the water present in the juice. Once the yeast is activated, it absorbs all the sugar in the juice, producing carbon dioxide. This is the same process that occurs with yeast and bread. Although, with the length of time that the yeast spends in the juice, which may last from 10 days to a month, it also produces ethyl alcohol along with the carbon dioxide. This gives the juice its alcohol and carbonates as well. Remember that during the fermentation process, the color of the juice changes due to yeast reaction with sugar. This shows that a chemical reaction has occurred. As I stated before, the production of carbon dioxide is evidence of a chemical reaction. So, now that I've covered some of the uses of yeast, you may think, what's the point of watching this? I mean, what does this have to do with me? Well, if it wasn't for yeast, almost all bread would be flat and tasteless. And, since grains are a large part of our diet, as well as part of the market around the world, yeast makes quite a big difference. Regarding alcohol, we may not have ever had alcohol if it wasn't for yeast. Still, I believe it's up to you to decide whether or not yeast is that important. I mean, if you only enjoy flatbread and have no concern for alcohol, then you really don't have to care about yeast.